Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Hello, I'm Mike Sanborn. I wrote An Alcoholic's Collateral Damage. I've also written a book prior to that called A Cop in a Small City, Examining Mission and Integrity. I'm happy to talk about both, but I'll start with An Alcoholic's Collateral Damage. Let me try the screen share. Sharing this two more, okay. All right, so I'm sharing my first screen, and this is the cover to my book, Alcoholic's Collateral Damage. The picture on there is me and my three siblings. I'm about 6 years older in that picture. My oldest sister, is about 7, and my youngest sister, Debbie, would be about 2, and Gary in between. So, what's unusual about my book is, and when people talk about alcoholics in the family, usually they think about the father as being the alcoholic, and then when you talk about violent alcoholic, you think about the father being the violent alcoholic. But very different in my family. My mother was the alcoholic, and she was very violent. I remember vividly this period of time. That's in our living room, and she used to, I remember a kitchen off the living room, and she was in there all the time. And I remember she used to drink her beer. She always had it on the counter with whatever she was doing in there. Debbie was usually in a high chair or some sort of a walker in the kitchen with her. And the other three of us would be playing in the living room, and she'd always want us on the floor, playing with our toys, like good little pets, I guess. But the problem was that so did her thing and I did my thing, and Gary just didn't have his own to do. He used to intrude on ours, and it was really quite reckless. He'd come in I like playing with my wooden train and a track, and he'd come in and just crash and break it. And I'd protest to Mom, and Mom would just simply say, play nice with him, take care of him, And then I'd give up on that, and he'd go and wreck whatever Scylla was doing, and I'd find something else, and he'd come wreck that. So we were just not very happy at all. And then as we started fighting more and more, Mom would just come. I remember Mom was large, overweight. She got worse and worse as time went on. But I can still hear the thundering footprints, boom, boom, boom. And I knew it was coming. We were all going to get whacked. And she didn't want to bend over and do anything extraordinary. So she, we were all on the floor, so our heads always got whacked, and I can still feel the tension in my neck of it getting hit by my mom. So that started a very bad relationship. As time goes on, Solo was responsible for Debbie, and I was responsible for Gary. Any trouble Gary got into, it was my fault because I let him get into the trouble. And then, of course, I tried to keep him out of trouble so I wouldn't get any trouble. And punch him on the shoulder is the only thing in our rapport to try to control him. And he'd protest, and I'd get in trouble for that too. So it was a no-win situation. I just always try to adapt by just trying to find something else. And eventually, I'd play with mostly imaginary things with a string or a pencil or something. Imagine a spacecraft flying through and the string being used to rescue people. Later, I heard my mom comment on, I was easy to take care of because give me a piece of string and I can entertain myself. Well, I would have much rather had toys. But that's what I did to avoid Gary, and that's all we had for toys. So I divided the book up into developmental segments, which really kind of moved around where we lived. Shortly after this picture was taken, we moved out to California, where we spent 2 years out there. It'd be my first experience in a school, and it was a Catholic school. So I didn't make friends well, quite typical of an alcoholic family. I remember the teacher, a nun, there was another kid named Danny that was pretty much a loner too. So he tried to develop us into friendships, but really there was no friendship there. Danny liked to walk around the edge of the playground, and I just kind of followed him around. And then after a couple of years out there, we moved several times out there. Every time we moved, it was going to be better. Things were going to be better. Things are going to be better. And other things. Things will be better when Dad get the job out in California. Well, things were probably better for a very short period of time, and then they got worse than they were before. So then there was no plan for things to get better too. And eventually, whatever happened in California, I'm not entirely sure. Last place I remember we lived at was on a convent, and there was that house there where we lived, and I think Dad was responsible for taking care of the grounds, and then suddenly we had to leave, and so then it was decided that we'd come back to Vermont. I'm suspicious that Dad was just kind of overwhelmed, and Mom treated him horribly, and I'm starting to recognize that. Is that for playing with myself, I like to go out with nature, and ultimately I end up with a master's degree in environmental science. But I would play with the strange nature out there, the stink bugs. I started to play with them, but they were not very, I hated them, so they smelled awful. Scared of snakes because my mom instilled that fear in me. I played, and she tried to instill fear of scorpions, but I played with scorpions with a stick and things like that. Lizards, I like to chase lizards, and there was jackrabbits out behind our house, so I used to watch them. Of course, never get very close to them. So I entertained myself with natural surroundings. And I remember we used to find the rattlesnakes that got run over by cars. And I brought one home one day, and my mother took it. She thought she'd have fun with it, and she coiled it up on the hood of the car. So when my dad went out to go to start the car, there's the snake looking at him, and he panicked and ran back into the house, and Mom got a big thrill out of that and called him a coward. I remember that very vividly. She treated him awful. And much to my dad, as I think about it, he tried. He really, really did try. But that's back in the 50s. Nobody knew how to deal. There's the days of father knows best and my 3 sons and all that. And the dad was the breadwinner, and Mom took care of the kids and stayed home. And he very much tried to live that impression that my mother had for him. But at any rate, I suspect because Dad wasn't able to keep up with all what he's supposed to do on the grounds of the convent, we probably got kicked out, and that's when we decided we'd come back home to Vermont. So we did move there. 4 days on the road, sleeping in a car, switching off the drivers, and I wrote some about that too. I remember when Mom switched off for Dad to drive. He tired. He hadn't slept, and I remember Mom telling me to watch him if he starts to go off the road to wake him up. It was a terrible thing for a little 9-year-old boy. He'll be trying to watch Dad, and as soon as he got towards the edge of the lane or something, I'd tap him on the shoulder, and he'd say he was all right. And eventually, I just gave up on that, and figured if we crash, we crash, and I just kind of hid down on the floorboards in the back behind the driver's seat. When we got back from California, I think I got a picture of that. Not right handy right now, but when we got back from California, we stayed with my grandparents a few days, and then we ended up renting a house just down the street. And we're back in school again, and again, I'm the new kid at school. It's in the middle of the school year. You don't make very good friends. I used to go out and try to get on the swings, and the swings belonged to the girls, so I had to get off. So I ended up just sitting on the steps. Got into a fight one time. My punishment was to stay inside, and that really was no punishment for me. I was just as happy inside as I was sitting on the steps outside. So I divided the early years before school, the years in California, the few years in middle grade schools back here in Vermont. We moved several times, and we ended up in Claremont, New Hampshire. That's where I live now. And again, we went to the Catholic school. That was probably the most violent playground I was ever on. There was a gang of boys that followed this young DuPont kid who liked to go around terrorizing everybody. I avoided him mostly by doing chores for the nuns, chopping ice in the middle time, in the winter time, and sweeping sidewalks and when there was no snow and things like that. And the nuns would give me an apple as a reward. And, really wasn't much of a reward for me, other than it was a reason to stay off the playground so I didn't get any trouble. But eventually it did, and this guy challenged me to a fight after school, and I took him up on it. He didn't show up. Probably just as well. I didn't know how to fight. But I was aware that situations was deteriorating at home, and Mom and Dad were fighting. We were in lesser and lesser apartment buildings as before we moved to California. We had bought a house, and it was an ordinary house out in California. We moved several times. I think we only rented. I don't think they ever bought a house. And then we moved back to Vermont. We ended up in apartment buildings that were really substandard. Then the move to Claremont, again, it was a rented house, and finally they decided to move to Charlestown, the little farm building, and I do have a picture of that. So the farmhouse with the barn in the back and the old silo. That's my sister with my pet goat, Herbie. I used to try to hook him up to the wagon, and he didn't want any part of pulling the wagon, but he did like riding in it, so I used to pull him around. But for some reason, my mother wanted a picture of my sister pulling my goat in my wagon. I guess there's the priorities there, car in the background there. But this is the place where we spent 3 years, and this is the place where my family fell apart. We were aware, Phil and I were becoming more and more aware of her drinking, and how it was impacting us. And my grandfather was horrible too. Always had this, nobody would be good enough for him. I could never hold things right. I was too stupid to do this and too stupid to do that. And my father wasn't much good either, and he couldn't do stuff in the field. And my grandfather was a vegetable farmer. Yeah, I got a picture of his farm too. These pictures are in my book, by the way. There's my grandfather's farm. There's the house, the barns, in the fields where the crops were. But so and I would spend our summers mostly down there working on the farm. And Gary and Debbie would be home with Mom. Once in a while, Gary would come down, but he goofed up on the farm just like he did here, all the time with me. And of course, we got blamed for it. And my grandfather would kick him out of the field, which was supposed to be a punishment. So what did I learn while writing the book? Well, I had set out when I was the only one in the family to go to college, and I had studied quite a lot of psychology. Actually, I'm a science guy. I majored in biology, minored in chemistry, physics. Then I went in the Army. I got a master's degree in human resources, mostly leadership, and I ultimately got a master's degree in another second master's degree in environmental studies. So I went into the book because when I started college, I wanted to understand alcoholism, so I had done some research on it already. And what I wanted to do was learn how to apply what I learned in college and what the literature says about alcoholics and apply it to my situation. And like I said, is that my family was very unique in that my mother was the violent alcoholic, not my father. So I think I learned more by going back and examining relationships, and also the child development I'd learned about and where we were at and how it impacted us at these different stages. And that's why I broke it up into the ways we did. This house we lived in, Mom eventually drove Dad out. But I guess what I learned too is going back and looking at these situations, and we'd always heard that Dad was no good. He couldn't keep up the par. But you know what? He went and he remarried, and he had 4 other kids, and he did just fine by those 4 other kids. He would have done just fine by us if he'd been given us a chance. I can remember he came back several times, and every time he ended up getting pushed back out again. He even attempted suicide one time. So going back and looking at all these things, I learned a different opinion of my father. Rather than he having abandoned us, I could look at the circumstances and see that he didn't want to abandon us. He got driven out, and she's very violent. When we were living in Springfield, Vermont, there was a time we were playing in the living room, but we didn't have a clear view of the kitchen in this apartment building. We just heard this big. We were playing in the living room on the floor with the TV running, with the cartoons playing. We just heard this big crash, and Mom came stomping out. It was like dinner time, and she went upstairs and never came back down. And then everything quiet in the kitchen. So we went. So and I peeked around the corner, and there's Dad laying on the floor, and a pot of spaghetti all over the floor. And Dad started to stir. We called him a couple of times, and he started to stir, and he picked things up, and he finished cooking dinner and fed us dinner. The next day, Mom said, well, he said Gary looked more like the milkman than him. But as I reflect back on that, I think he probably was trying to start controlling her drinking, and she wanted no part of that. And she clobbered him with that pot of spaghetti. And my older sister ended up getting that pot. It's had a dent in it. We always, I don't know, there was something special about the pot because it had a dent from my dad's head. And that was the old Silver Master or whatever. It was a good rugged pot. well, the early experience where language had power was communicating with parents, um, complaining about my brother, um, trying to get our early needs met. Um, but later in college, then I got, of course, the more sophisticated power of language in writing reports, which is kind of like the mentality I use in writing my two books. Both of them are very factual. Um, well, I hated English and history all through school. Um, and part of it was my placement. I wish I was placed in a higher. I was in the top level of math and science and all that, and why couldn't they place me in a higher level and challenge me more in English? So I wish I had gotten my writing skills earlier in life, but it was a real shocker when I went to college. But I got them. I got pretty good writing skills from my college. Um, the, well, both. When I was, I should show you the cover of my other book. Uh, where'd it go? Um, the Cop in a Small City. Um, that that was just a collection of stories, and I was energized by writing most of the stories, but there were a few of them that took me back emotionally. Um, this writing the alcoholic book, that was that was much tougher because it brought me back emotionally to those times. So um, I found it more exhausting to write the alcoholics book than it was to write the police book. Um, but I still, in both cases, I wanted people. So if you want to know what it was like to be a cop, or if you want to know what it's like to grow up in an alcoholic family, I had that in mind. I was writing both of those. Or if you were thinking about becoming a police officer, I think this would be a good book to show you the type of stuff that police do. There's some pretty horrendous stories I have in it. These are stories. These are actually all real. I changed names in the police book. I did not change any names in the alcoholics book. Those are the real people. But I did change names in the police book. But the stories are real, and just as factual as if I was writing a police report. Um, well, the first book that I don't recall. Well, Maya Angelou. Uh, I read some of her stuff. That might have loosened a tear or something with what she went through. Um, she wrote about her uncle sexually abusing her. Uh, that that probably is one that. Because any of the books in school that were assigned were very boring, and of course in college I read mostly the classics. Um, yeah, Maya Angelou was probably the one um, that brought most emotion out on me. Um, I think that was the I know why a cage bird sings or something. But anyway, it was one of her books, and she described what her uncle had done to her. Um, yeah, uh, not I got more tears writing my own books than I did reading anybody else's. So the other thing too about writing these books is that if you were in an alcoholic family or you are a police officer, hopefully you'd be able to find something that I encountered that you could identify with, uh, and maybe benefit from what I had to say in there. So in writing the book, my older sister died about a year ago. Um, all my siblings were in poor health, and I maintain excellent health. I still meet the physical requirements of my time I was in the service or the police. I can still pass those entry exams. Um, but they all started smoking, and of course horrible diets and stuff. So all my younger siblings, they've been disabled for several years now. They're not working, and like I say, my older sister, she's been disabled for the last 20 years or so, and ended up in a nursing home and eventually dying. So it has a profound effect on your health too. The collateral damage. My mother, because of her intense weight, made excuses for it. She was big boned, and that's why she was heavy. But no, she was consuming over 3,000 calories in a single sitting with a 6-pack of beer. It was not unusual for her to put down 3 6-packs of beer, and then the big 16 ounces. Though, when I got to college and started learning about diets, and I took nutrition. There was no doubt in my mind. And of course, Mom would eat huge amounts of food when she was drinking too. So that's where her weight came from. It wasn't big boned, but that whole mentality is what poisoned my sister's health too. She was also very overweight, and rather than try to eat healthier and exercise and stuff like that, it was just written off that that's the way she was meant to be. The thing I'm sure everybody that has anything to do with alcoholics, whether you lived in the family or whether it's the extended family or somebody next door, the alcoholic is very secretive and controlling. If anybody ever asked us about our mom's drinking, we would immediately deny it, even though we knew maybe at home right now she's really quite drunk. Writing the book has definitely impacted the way I see myself. When I was writing the police book, it was, always the what ifs. What if I'd done this instead of that? Though I think most of the time I'm pretty satisfied with what I did as a police officer. When I was a child, though, what if I was more open to a teacher that might have been trying to help me? There was one really great teacher, but it wasn't until I got in high school that she directed me to college. There was nothing that helped me at home. There was this social worker who we were never, the social worker never met with the kids. Whenever the social worker showed up, the kids went outside to play. Why didn't that social worker talk to us? But we would have denied my mother's alcoholism. But that's the what if. Maybe if there was somebody along the line that could help. Eventually, Syl and I think we were about 12, 13. And we started contemplating talking to my mother. And there was one time that usually Mom didn't go to bed until the beer was gone. But there was now and then she would just get so drunk. Maybe she bought a 4th 6-pack or something and she couldn't quite finish it. She went to bed. We even made a sign and put it on that those few beers that were left in the refrigerator. Please stop. And then we started thinking about it. Oh no, Mom's going to really get after it. Really be upset with us if she finds this. So we took it back out. We chickened out. So Sol and I again, weeks later, probably says, how about if we talk to her? So finally, we got up the courage, and of course, Mom was drinking when we talked to her, and we cried our eyes out and really poured out our hearts and souls. And Mom cried too, and she says, "Okay, I'll stop." So wow, was that a big one? So I went outside, and I was playing outside, and then Mom came to me um, and said, Solace is okay, but when I started drinking, I can't stop. That was a revelation to me. Uh, and But she wanted my permission too, and I didn't want to give it, but I did. Um, and I just knew the whole case was lost. Um, so no, nobody else in my family has written any books. What's great is that my mother used to boast about she was the first one in her family to graduate high school, but that really wasn't a big deal because for my grandparents who had sixth grade and my grandmother eighth grade educations, that was typical of the times too. And it was typical of the times that people were starting to graduate high school. And I was the first one to go to college and graduate college. And that persisted until my daughter went to college. So what I'm really pleased with is both daughters graduated from college. It wasn't any fight at all. It was just they went to college like they would go on to high school. It was just kind of what their plan in life. They're both professional. One's a nurse, the other one's a special ed teacher. But what I'm proud of now too is that my oldest daughter just now, in the last few days, completed her master's degree, and the younger daughter, she's back working on hers too. So there's other cousins and stuff that have graduated college. Only very few though. But I was the only one in the family to hold a master's degree, and I'm just very proud that now my oldest daughter has hers, and my youngest daughter will have hers in a few more months. But they haven't written books, but they are very professional, well educated. Very pleased with them. 3 words. I guess caring and dedicated are words I would describe. My mother, well, pretty much. My grandparents they stayed married for 50 some odd years till my grandfather died, but every one of their kids ended up in divorce. Every one of their kids either married an alcoholic or were an alcoholic. 2 of them married twice. I've been married for 47 years now. Nobody else in my family has done that. So caring and dedicated, and community oriented, I guess. Both those books I wrote, I hope help somebody. I have 28 years working for in the New Hampshire retirement system for police. Always public service. Police, water and sewer superintendent. I got 20 some odd years of teaching, so I'm always in service and trying to help people. I'm always available. I teach at a school that helps families that have families that are going through difficult times. It's a residential school in Vermont. I teach there, and I teach online. It's an online virtual learning academy here in New Hampshire. So, and those students online, they can contact me absolutely every day, and I grade their work every day. I've always done that ever since, even when I was teaching in the brick and mortar schools. Something really profound. It's, one of the instructors in the my master's program said to me, he says, if you're requiring the students to do the work, then you are obligated to get the work back to them in a reasonable amount of time. I always, if they gave me the assignment today, they got it back the next day we met. And I've always done that, and I continue that with my online teaching. Is that I grade absolutely every day, even if I got to be up all night. I'll get it done, and then I'll also make sure I have times where they can sign up on my calendar. I also have times every day that they can do that, and they can send me emails too, of course, and I'll answer those. If I can answer the question in email, that's great. If not, then I'll ask them to book a time with me to meet online. So, very, very dedicated. want to make sure I get things right for people. So I'm very, very cautious about giving any misinformation. A lot of the facts in both my writings, I had to go do a little bit of research to make sure, silly things like getting the right street name when I'm talking about what street I was on. When I wrote about past teachers, I wanted to make sure I spelled their names right. Well, Daisy Ronick is not an easy name to spell, and I could vaguely remember the guidance counselor is living good, but exactly, and he spells it in an odd way. So of course I went back to the old yearbook to find that kind of stuff. So I just want to make sure the information I give is the best I can to the best of my ability. Yeah, particularly in the book "A Cop in a Small City," is that police officers have a lot of discretion. You can make the arrest or you can bargain sometimes. I did a lot of that restitution type stuff. For instance, a kid rode his dirt bike through a farmer's field and damaged the field. He didn't realize, he says, "Oh, it was just grass." Well, no, he tore up the grass and it set it back a bit. He didn't realize what he'd done. So I said, "Why don't you go talk to the farmer?" So he did, and it was really right out of the movies. The farmer made an appointment with him. He worked for him a couple of Saturdays, and when he got done, he had done a good job. The farmer paid him for what he'd done. That was just absolutely amazing how well it came out. And that little kid that was 12 years old when he did that, he's a business owner here in Claremont and doing well. And just a good person. He could have gone to juvenile court and got court diversion and all that stuff, but just set up directly with the farmer and apologized, and they probably both came out as friends too. So not making the arrest sometimes. I remember one of my superior officers used to say, law enforcement is not social work. And of course I had a bachelor's degree from a pretty good school, St. Michael's. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. Police officers are trying to influence the social benefit of people. So they are, in essence, social workers. And he just wouldn't do that. We just make arrests and we bring them to jail. But that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And it could even make it worse. Particularly, and I wrote about this one time. There was a felon. My very first day on the job, of course, I'm riding with an FTO, and we see this guy staggering down the sidewalk. He goes, "Oh, there he is!" And we pull over, and I forget what I called him in the book. But let's say, well, John. Hey, John. And this guy was really quite drunk and staggering, and my FTO just grabbed him, threw him on the hood of the car, and handcuffed him. We brought him to jail, and he pushed the guy around. The guy ended up falling and splitting his head. Knocked him unconscious for a little bit. I mean, and later on, I learned that if they're drunk, I'll give them a ride home, and then I won't have to worry about all that other stuff. But later, I had, of course, several encounters over the months and even years. But there was one time I'm driving down this very same street, and I see him, and he's walking briskly. So I can, maybe he's sober. I didn't think any too much of it. I was about to drive by when all of a sudden he pulls a gun out from behind his back and from his belt, and he jumps in a truck. Oh my God, here he is. I know him being a convicted felon. I never really had a lot to do, so I don't know him that well. And he jumps in this truck, and I figured he's carjacking it. He's a convicted felon with a gun, no less, if anything. So I stopped the police car behind him, and I get out, because if you're sitting in a police car with somebody else who's got a gun, you're a sitting target. So I get out of the police car, so I'm down beside my police car, and I'm yelling at him, "Show me the gun!" And I have my gun trained right at the base of his neck. and I was in complete committed to killing him if that truck had drove away, because I wasn't going to have him. It was a woman behind the wheel. I wasn't going to have him put that person in great danger. So I kept yelling, and it kept not cutting. I'm calling for backup. I'm wondering, where's my backup? I'm out here. I'm all by myself. It was just absolutely scary situation for me. Scary that I wasn't afraid for my own safety. I was afraid I was going to shoot this guy and kill him. And then suddenly the woman turns, and I recognize her, and she's holding the gun up by the trigger guard. I was also doing substitute teaching when I worked in the police department, and she was one of my students. And I knew her last name, and of course I knew the other guy's last name. It's the same last name. So they're related. So, all right. So then I walk up and to the driver window, and she hands me the gun, and because I put mine away, and I call in the serial number of the gun to the dispatcher who runs a record check on it, and the gun's not stolen. So I asked, "What are you doing, John, with this thing? You're a felon. You can't even if your sister has the gun, you can't even be in the same vehicle with her. It's a violation of your parole. You're a convicted felon in the presence of a firearm." He goes, "Yeah, I know." He says, "I've been sober for 6 months. I've started my own business in Manchester, and I came up here to collect the debt. And this is the way the guy was going to pay the debt. And we got another buyer right down the road. He was going to sell the gun for a couple $100. And I just kind of shook my head. If I had arrested him, he would have gone back to jail for at least 6 years. But because I was part of the community, I recognized his sister. I said, okay." And I says, "But get this gun out of here as soon as you can, because I don't want you getting caught by somebody else, and nor do I want you getting your sister in any trouble." So of course I saw her sister again in class, and she was telling me, give me updates. Her brother was doing just fine in his business in Manchester. He had to just get out of Claremont because the cops kept riding him down. So I went from almost killing the man to letting him go. I can't imagine any other cop, and I still think if anybody reads that in my book, any cop reads that in my book, they would think I was an idiot for not arresting this guy. It was a good pinch. Cops like to say, "Hey, yeah, I sent so many felons to jail," but I like to say, I helped the community as a whole. Putting him in jail wouldn't help the community, wouldn't help him, wouldn't help his sister or any of his family. I understand he has died now. I mean, he paid the penalty of hard life, and it affected his health, but he never went back to jail. So those are the big choices a police officer can make, and you use the discretion, and sometimes it comes out well, and if not, he's going to mess up again, and I'll have another opportunity to arrest him again. So I'm just hoping that those are the sort of things I wrote about, and then again, when as a child, I wrote about how I handled and saw situations, and I also kind of narrate a little bit about what I've learned since, and how it was affecting me, and hopefully it helps everybody, and it helps everybody rethink. So along that line is how I describe myself as serving the community. Well, my whole family does that. My wife's a nurse. Older daughter's a nurse. I'm a teacher. My younger daughter's a teacher. My granddaughter, she's going to the same school I went to, St. Michael's. She's a sophomore now. My grandson, he's a senior in high school. He's done a lot of volunteering and stuff like that. So it's my granddaughter. So it was dynamically different, so much different than my siblings. And the difference is I went to college. My siblings did not. In fact, my brother never graduated high school. My sisters barely graduated high school and never did anything further beyond that. Okay, well. Well, I will be back on again tomorrow, um, and Monday. I hope people will join in. I'm also available on Twitter, GM Sanborn. On Twitter, you can just search G. Michael Sanborn on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. I have a YouTube channel there too. So I've done several presentations on communications and police ethics and police hiring practices. Those are all available on YouTube or on my website, which is scrolling across the bottom here, author G. Michael Sanborn, GoDaddy, sites.com. So, and you can contact me through either any of the social media or the website. Okay, so if there's no other questions, I think I'll call that it. And hope to see everybody again soon.